Many people do not see death as an end, but as the beginning of something much more meaningful, a transition into what lies beyond. This thought, so profound and moving, makes us reflect on who we truly are and what we do with our time in this world. Padre Pio, a man who dedicated his life to divine service, lived in such a way that his existence was like a bridge between earthly life and heaven. Throughout his life, he faced numerous struggles, but his faith never wavered. And just before his death, something extraordinary happened that left everyone around him speechless. In 1968, his health was already severely deteriorated, but his spirit remained unstoppable, almost indestructible. Despite his physical weakness, he clung to his mission with all his being, unwilling to abandon his work even for a single day. He was a man who would rather die in the fulfillment of his duty, in prayer and in service to others. His life was a constant dedication, always ready to hear confessions, never allowing fatigue or pain to stop him. If you're enjoying what you're seeing, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel to keep discovering more stories like this. Your support helps us bring you more meaningful and reflective stories. A few months before his death, Padre Pio made a particular request. He asked for an image of Saint Joseph to be placed next to his cell. Every day, without fail, he would stop there and gaze at the image in silence, deeply absorbed in contemplation. It was as though, through that image, he was asking for the protection and serenity of Saint Joseph for what was to come. Soon after, we learned that he had asked Saint Joseph for a peaceful death, a request that reflected the calm he desired in his final moments. During this time, something unusual began to happen at the monastery. An uncanny calm descended upon every corner. The monks spoke of a mysterious silence that filled the halls, the rooms, and even the common areas. It was a deep silence, as if the entire place was preparing for the inevitable. Meanwhile, Padre Pio continued to pray, more intensely than ever, as his final days drew near. The prayers he had learned as a child in Pietrelcina, up to the solemn Our Father he recited in his cell during his last hours, were always his refuge. His life was, ultimately, a constant conversation with God, a profound dialogue that never stopped, in both the bright and dark moments. Padre Pio always knew that his time on earth was limited and that he was walking toward heaven. He lived each day with the certainty that his eternal destination was nearing, and he eagerly awaited the moment when he would finally be with God forever. In one of his letters, he wrote to Father Agostino, confessing that he was tired of living on earth. His words were deep and sincere, reflecting a desire to escape the physical suffering that plagued him. He described his life on earth as a bitter torment, but at the same time he feared deeply losing Jesus. This fear of losing his faith and his connection to the Lord never left him, even in his final days. Just before his death, he made one last gesture of humility and faith, asking his superiors to pray for him. This was his final act of devotion, a reminder of how his life was always dedicated to prayer, service, and divine love. Padre Pio's story is not just the end of a journey. It is also a testament to how faith can transform life, providing a hope that endures beyond death. As the end of his time on earth drew near, Padre Pio spent his last moments surrounded by a deep spiritual presence, as if he were already walking with God, feeling that his mission on earth had reached its culmination. The night before his death, Padre Pio renewed his vows as a Franciscan, reaffirming his commitment to God in the religious life he had chosen. Despite his severe health condition, his faith remained unshakable. With a weak voice, he constantly whispered, "Jesus, Mary," while holding his rosary tightly, an act that reflected the strength of his spirituality, even in his final moments. But around 2:30 a.m., something very peculiar happened. Padre Pio, known for his mystical experiences, suddenly began having visions that no one else could see. In a whisper, he said, "I see two mothers." Many interpret this phrase as a reference to the Virgin Mary and his own mother, who was also named Mary, adding an air of mystery to his final hours. As the day progressed, the stigmata that had marked his body for so many years, symbols of his spiritual suffering, began to fade. People present in his room claimed that the scales on his hands began to fall off, indicating that the miracle of his suffering had come to an end. When the doctors arrived after his death, They found no signs of the stigmata, and his skin was smooth and healthy. This left everyone astonished, as many believed that God had touched him in a special way in his final moments. Additionally, something even more remarkable occurred. The room where Padre Pio rested began to smell of orange blossom, a fragrance long associated with his presence, which many interpreted as a sign of his holiness. Padre Pio's funeral was an impressive event, a reflection of the deep impact he had on the lives of so many people. Around 100,000 people came to pay their respects and bid him farewell, gathering in an immense crowd to mourn his passing. To honor his memory, helicopters flew over the crowd, dropping flowers and holy cards, a final show of respect and affection for the man who had touched so many lives. His final resting place, in a granite crypt beneath the altar of the church, remains a place of pilgrimage for those seeking to learn from his life, which was a channel of God's grace. Padre Pio often said, "I can help you more from heaven than on earth," and these words have proven to be a tangible truth for his followers. His mission and influence are still alive, and many of his disciples continue to follow his guidance, inspired by his example and unwavering faith. Padre Pio's legacy did not end with his death. In fact, it seems to grow stronger every day. In life, he would celebrate Mass at San Giovanni Rotondo, and the atmosphere in that place was filled with a profound spiritual energy, a presence that transcended the physical. The Masses he celebrated were not ordinary events. They were marked by gratitude and divine connection. On one occasion, the Mass was especially significant, as it was celebrated in thanksgiving for the worldwide network of prayer groups that had recently been recognized by the Holy Office of Rome, a testament to how his mission was expanding globally. Padre Pio was deeply content, knowing that all the effort he had put into consolidating prayer groups worldwide had borne fruit. These groups, which he had helped organize and strengthen over the years, were now thriving globally, a testament to his tireless dedication and work. However, as he moved away from the altar, his body began to succumb to fatigue and weakness, and he nearly fell. In that moment, his Capuchin brothers quickly reacted, supporting him to prevent him from collapsing. At that instant, Padre Pio's trembling, broken voice was the only thing that connected him to the thousands of faces before him. With immense love for all, his words were a soft whisper filled with compassion. "My children, my children." It was his way of conveying all the affection he felt for his congregation, even as his health failed him. Later that same day, Padre Pio went to a window in the monastery to bless the people gathered in the piazza below. Even though he was gravely ill, with the help of his two brothers, he leaned out the window, showing once again how much he loved his spiritual children. This simple act, yet full of devotion and tenderness, left a lasting impression. That night, around 9 p.m., Padre Pio did something that deeply moved everyone present. He called Father Pellegrino on the intercom. This moment was filled with emotion and marked one of Padre Pio's final interactions with his brothers and his community, a reminder of his constant love and closeness to those who had walked with him throughout his life. When Father Pellegrino entered the room that night, he found Padre Pio crying, which was highly unusual for the normally calm and composed monk. Seeing Padre Pio, known for his spiritual strength, showing such vulnerability was both an emotional and unsettling moment. Concerned for his well-being, Pellegrino made sure everything was in order before returning to his quarters, after comforting him and reminding him of the time. In those peaceful moments of reflection, Padre Pio expressed his desire to renew his religious vows, an act filled with profound significance. With sincerity that reflected his total commitment, he recited his vow to be poor, holy, and obedient, reaffirming his devotion to God and his life as a Franciscan. "I, Padre Pio of Pietrelcina, swear and promise to Almighty God, to the Blessed Virgin Mary, to our Holy Father St. Francis, and to all the saints, to observe the rule of the Little Brothers confirmed by Pope Honorius every day of my life," he said firmly, as if each word were a declaration of his unshakable faith. Despite suffering from arthritis and enduring constant pain, something remarkable happened that night. An unexpected change occurred in his body. Padre Pio, who had relied on a wheelchair to move, was able to stand up and walk quickly to the veranda without assistance. This almost miraculous act surprised everyone nearby, and was seen as a sign of the divine power that accompanied him in his final moments of life. When Padre Pio reached the veranda that night, he did something he hadn't done in a long time. He stretched out his hand and turned on the light himself. A simple gesture, yet one full of meaning. Then he focused on a specific spot on the porch, as if he could see beyond what his eyes were truly perceiving, as if he were looking into another realm, where life and death intertwine. This moment, so filled with mystery, leaves a deep feeling. Does this story make you feel something? If so, we invite you to hit like and super thanks to show your support, as it motivates us to keep sharing more impactful stories like this. Thank you for your help. It is thanks to you that we can continue bringing these stories. Later in the night, when everything was quiet and peaceful, Padre Pio stood on the veranda and looked ahead, as if seeing the path that would carry his body in just a few hours. It was at that exact moment when a wave of illness struck him hard. He was weak, and his strength seemed to have completely faded. He couldn't stand on his own, so he had to return to his room immediately. His skin turned very pale, a clear sign that his strength was quickly fading, as if death was already drawing near. In that moment of pain and fragility, he repeated again and again the words, "Jesus, Mary," but his voice grew fainter, as if the echo of his faith was slowly fading away. On the wall of his room, there was a picture of Padre Pio's parents, an image that, as his illness worsened, caught his attention. He stared at the photo and, with a weak and confused voice, murmured, "But I see two mothers." His words hung in the air, as if he were seeing something beyond the tangible reality around him. At that moment, a severe asthma attack caused him to lose consciousness, and his body began to struggle intensely to stay alive. The room, already filled with a heavy atmosphere, grew even colder, reflecting the difficulty of his breathing. His skin turned cold and clammy, as if his body was starting to give way. Within minutes, a doctor arrived by his side, administered an injection, and provided oxygen to try to stabilize his breathing. However, as the medical work became more challenging, the spiritual work also intensified. The Capuchin brothers, fully aware of the gravity of the situation, began to pray aloud. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, I give you my heart and my soul," they prayed, and their calm, steady voices contrasted with the chaos around them. Father Paolo, with indescribable solemnity, led the sacrament of the anointing of the sick, while Padre Pio, though fully aware of everything happening around him, struggled to breathe. Each word of the prayer seemed to be a support for his soul, a refuge amidst his physical suffering as he approached the end of his journey on earth. Despite feeling cold and sweating profusely, Padre Pio appeared to be at peace. His body, weakened by illness, was struggling to survive, but his soul seemed to be elsewhere, beyond the physical suffering. Due to his critical condition, an urgent injection was administered directly to his heart, as the doctors feared he was on the verge of a heart attack. However, in his final moments, Padre Pio's faith remained unshakable. Even as he lost the ability to speak, his lips silently moved, forming the name Jesus as a final act of devotion and surrender. His spiritual brothers, the Capuchins, called out to him, hoping to see some sign of recognition or response. It was at that moment that Padre Pio opened his eyes one last time. He looked at them with a deep expression of love, a glimpse of farewell that made it clear his soul was already prepared for the eternal journey. At 2:30 a.m. on September 23, 1968, Padre Pio passed away in peace, holding his rosary close to his chest, a symbol of his constant prayer and faith. Interestingly, just a few days earlier, on September 20th, the 50th anniversary of receiving his stigmata had been celebrated, a significant milestone in his life. That day, many of his followers who lived far away came to attend a dawn mass in his honor. For them, it was a day of great importance, but for Padre Pio, it was just another day devoted to his faith. He continued to serve others and pray, as he always had. This moment reflected how deeply committed he was to his spiritual path, a man whose life was defined by service and constant devotion to God and others. Today, on the anniversary of the stigmata, the Mass held in the church was a simple and reflective act, exactly as Padre Pio would have wanted. There were no grand speeches or large festivities. Instead, the celebration was a quiet expression of faith and devotion. The sanctuary, which had been his spiritual home for so many years, was filled with hundreds of roses of deep red, symbolizing Padre Pio's profound devotion to the Passion of Christ. These beautiful flowers were also placed on the crucifix where he received the stigmata in 1918, a poignant tribute to the 50 years he had carried Christ's wounds on his own body. Those attending the Mass were moved by the image of a man who had lived a life marked by suffering and devotion. He did not merely participate in the Mass, he lived it with every movement and expression, reliving Christ's death on the cross in a tangible way. Padre Pio, with his unique sensitivity, often had tears on his face as he prayed. Tears he quickly wiped away with his handkerchief as though trying to hide the pain in his soul while expressing his love for God and his sacrifice. By order of his superiors, the Mass on the anniversary of the stigmata was brief. It lasted only 30 minutes. However, what seemed like a simple liturgical act became a solemn moment, full of significance, because the very next day, Padre Pio had passed from this world. The attendees of the anniversary Mass in the International Prayer Groups Congress were deeply shocked to learn of his death. Many of his spiritual children were by his side in his final moments, which many saw as a gift from God, a comfort that showed how his legacy remained alive even in his last moments. Padre Pio had long been aware of the proximity of his departure. In 1966, he told his niece, Pia Forgonapelli, that he would not live more than 2 years, a prediction he seemed to know with certainty. Later, he confided to a friend that he would die at 81, which turned out to be accurate. He had an almost mystical certainty about the end of his time on earth, a certainty that allowed him to live his final days with deep serenity. He even asked Father Honorato Marcucci, a close collaborator, to return soon from his vacation so that his family and friends could be with him when the time came. This sense of preparation and anticipation made his death not just the end of a life, but the fulfillment of a mission lived with total devotion to God and to others. As his death approached, Padre Pio began to have visions of the building rising around him. In one of these visions, he revealed to his spiritual daughter, Josephine Bob, that he would die when the crypt of the Notre Dame Church was completed. Although he had always expressed a wish to be buried in a simple grave rather than a grand crypt. The new church was finished in 1959, but the crypt was not completed until much later, adding an air of mystery to his final days. Padre Pio passed away 16 hours after uttering his last words, leaving behind a legacy filled with enigmas. But there is still a more astonishing part of his story to tell. Just a few days before his death, a touching story unfolded in the bustling area of San Giovanni Rotondo. A woman from Catania, Sicily, had a simple but profound wish to see Padre Pio and kiss his hand. However, due to the crowds and her lack of money, this dream seemed impossible. But after having a vivid dream in which Padre Pio told her she had to visit him, she borrowed money and made the journey. Her persistence moved a kind priest who arranged a brief appointment with Padre Pio. When the woman arrived, Padre Pio stopped, looked at her with tenderness, and blessed her in a way that made her cry. She expressed her gratitude for this unexpected gift of grace. What she didn't know was that this act of love and mercy would be one of Padre Pio's last blessings before his departure. 15 days later, at the same time, the story of Jeanine brought to light another amazing act of kindness from Padre Pio. Shino, a devotee from Viella, was deeply distressed by the health of his daughter, Maria Pia, whom he feared was seriously ill, suspecting she might have a tumor or peritonitis. In his desperation, he asked Padre Pio for help through Father Alberto. Padre Pio's response was clear and direct. Maria Pia should not move and needed to be operated on immediately if necessary. Padre Pio's guidance, given with his usual wisdom and spiritual authority, was followed to the letter. Just a few hours after Padre Pio's prayer, Maria Pia experienced a miraculous improvement. Her recovery was so swift and complete that she was sent home from the hospital immediately. This occurred just one day before Padre Pio's death, and many consider it his final miracle on earth. Meanwhile, Marissa Liberati, born in Rome and a spiritual daughter of Padre Pio, greatly enjoyed the spiritual advice he gave her every 2 weeks. She also had a deep wish for Padre Pio to give the first communion to her 2 nieces. Padre Pio, always so generous and filled with love for his spiritual children, told Marisa that he would be delighted to give them communion once they completed their religious education in Rome. This interaction with Marisa reflected the deep spiritual connection he maintained with all those who sought his guidance, a testament to the love and dedication he always showed in his life and mission. Lucia and Anna, the nieces of Marisa Liberati, completed their religious education in San Giovanni Rotondo, and they were excited to receive their first communion, a significant spiritual milestone in their lives. However, their parents hesitated and delayed the moment, but Marisa, inspired by a dream, decided to take action. In her dream, Padre Pio's voice was urgent, telling her she must act quickly. Instead of going to Lourdes, as originally planned, Marisa chose to heed this inner call and make plans to take the girls to San Giovanni Rotondo while still wearing their first communion dresses. On September 22nd, a sorrowful yet symbolic day, the church was filled with faithful members of Padre Pio's worldwide prayer groups. It was a day of great spiritual significance, and Padre Pio, though already very weak and ill, was present, providing comfort and strength to those around him. In a deeply emotional ceremony, Padre Pio administered the Holy Communion to Lucia and then to Anna. It was a moment of great joy for the girls, and for all those present, a moment that represented the continuity of his spiritual mission. Anna Finoni was the last person to receive Holy Communion from Padre Pio's hands, an act of love and sacrifice that left an indelible mark. The following day, Padre Pio left this world, but this final act of devotion became one of the most powerful signs of his spiritual legacy. Throughout his life, Padre Pio demonstrated unwavering faith and devotion. He was certain that God was with us and that, no matter how difficult the journey, everything would work out in the end. His life was a constant testimony of that trust in divine providence. He taught that the best way to connect with God was through prayer and humility, two fundamental pillars in his spiritual life. He often said, "Prayer is the best weapon we have. It is the key that opens the heart of God." These words were not just advice, but an invitation to a life of constant and fervent prayer, as he knew that it was through prayer that the soul is strengthened and brought closer to the Creator. In his teachings, he emphasized the grace of humility, the virtue of purity, and the importance of living according to God's will, especially when faced with great trials. Padre Pio had a deep spiritual vision, seeing life as a battlefield where each challenge represented a step towards the ultimate victory in paradise. He would tell his disciples to remain calm and resign during difficult moments, teaching them to always trust in Jesus' love, to guide and protect them. "Jesus will never abandon you," he repeated, reinforcing the idea that earthly suffering is temporary and the true reward awaits in paradise, where eternal peace and happiness will reign. When Padre Pio's time on earth came to an end, his words and actions continued to inspire and guide his spiritual children. Although his physical life ended, the legacy of his faith lives on, a legacy that transcends his earthly existence and will continue to influence generations to come. Padre Pio taught that true strength lies in prayer, in humility, and in total surrender to God's will, and these principles remain alive in the hearts of those who revere him. His example of unshakable faith, sacrifice, and devotion has left an indelible mark on all who knew him or learned from his life. If this story has touched you, subscribe, leave a like, and even a super thanks to show your support. Your help allows us to keep sharing stories like this, stories that inspire and fill us with hope. Don't forget to activate notifications so you never miss a video, and continue being part of this community that honors the legacy of Padre Pio and other stories of faith.